We have 5 tremendous panelists, and I'm going to start with I'm going to throw out a question on concepts. We all talk about nearshoring, friendly shoring or friend shoring, and ally shoring. And I'm going to start with my speakers to start differentiating this. Okay, now I'm going to start here with Michelle, then Elaine, who is one of the creators of the concept of AllyShoring, and then we're going to move. Okay, Michelle?
So I think when you are trying to figure out the difference between each of these terms, in my mind, the terms are very similar. There are distinctions, but in the context of the U.S. Mexico Canadian relationship, it means very just practically speaking that the United States, Mexico, and Canada must be thinking outside of the box, working together, identifying opportunities to address a very concerning geopolitical landscape across the globe, to address national security concerns that are driving major shifts in policy, and all of these opportunities, whether it's friend shoring, ally shoring, or near shoring.
Elaine, ally shoring.
Thanks.
That's your concept.
Yeah, thanks, Enrique. First of all, it's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I want to give a little historical context around how ally shoring kind of came about, which was now more than 3 years ago, based on some research that I was doing at the time on China. And China is a theme that I think we need to come back to in the context of this conversation. But the term really came out of this idea, and together with my colleague John Austin from University of Michigan, who's not here today, but has helped to define this, is about going deeper around trade engagements to frame economic integration through democratic principles and norms. And it may seem like this is a very obvious idea, but if you really kind of dig into it, maybe it's not. And as we were three and a half years ago thinking about the impact of COVID and the fact that we couldn't get PPE out of China, that many supply chains had shut down, it really brought this conversation to the dinner table, right? As to what are critical supply chains for the US and more broadly for North America? How do we figure out how to protect those supply chains and decrease reliance on countries that may not be able to provide or don't want to provide what we need? And so AllyShoring is about going deeper around the critical goods, services, and implements that we need for our own economic security, our own economic resilience. It's very much tied into national security objectives. And this is something Michelle and I were talking about a bit earlier, that a lot of this thinking has been driven by the tension between US and China. That started in COVID, but it has now taken on a completely different tone and scale when we talk about the strategic competition between two countries who are both de-risking from each other. So we can dig into that a little bit more, but that's kind of the basics.
Let me go to Jasper Young from General Motors. Proximity, nearshoring, has been a driver factor for decision in the automotive sector. How does now other factors impacting the decisions on companies like General Motors in this case? Is this geopolitical aspect, national security, the semiconductor industry? Jasper?
Sure, and thank you also, Enrique, for having us here, and it's wonderful to be here at such a great event and sharing the stage with so many friends and partners. I think to your question, proximity, of course, and a number of market factors have always figured into supply chain sourcing strategies for General Motors and then for the broader automotive industry. I think you see the footprint here in the US, Mexico, and Canada, the strength of that in terms of direct manufacturing operations, a significant supply base. Here in Mexico alone, for GM, we have 4 manufacturing sites supported by 620 tier 1 suppliers, and we spend $28 billion a year in terms of buying those parts and goods from those suppliers. A lot of that is driven by the proximity, but I think what's been fascinating in the past couple of years beyond proximity, logistics, pricing of commodities, these market factors, you now have government policy and geopolitics now factoring into the equation. I joke with many of my global purchasing and supply chain colleagues at GM that they have always been a well-oiled machine for many decades, and they've never had to worry about having our public policy team involved. And now I actually spend much more time talking to them than my own policy team in Washington, D.C. So it's a great opportunity, but it's also just in terms of the incentives, the attention, the possibility in terms of improving that and building on a lot of the reshoring and AllyShoring activities, I think, in the automotive industry. But it's also, it's an added complexity, I think, as we move forward in terms of factoring for those government policies and for the geopolitics as we continue to build more resilient supply chains.
Yeah, that's quite amazing how, Jasper, how decisions in inside the companies, the teams, right? In the past, well, the decision of an investment was related with this proximity and suppliers and productivity and obviously the cost. Now the teams on public affairs, government affairs. I mean, we have been seeing in Washington these teams in many companies, technology companies, growing and growing and growing, making Washington probably, for me at least, I think is the most relevant city for Mexico now on investment decision. In the past, it was maybe New York, maybe Dallas, Houston, LA, but Washington is more and more relevant. I'll go with Ricardo, and as you can see in the screens, BBVA, a bank in Mexico. It's the affiliate organization here for this panel. Thank you, Ricardo, for the support of BBVA. And now the banks, the funds, and others are playing a huge role, not just lending money, not just creating the strategy of money or capital, but also organizing the whole, some industries in particular, clusters, regions. How is the bank playing the role here in Mexico and in the continent?
Thank you, Enrique, and congratulations for the event. I mean, this is an amazing event. As you all know, BBVA controls 1/3 of the system, of the banking system in Mexico. And some years from now, we decided to move to action. I think in the concept of AllyShoring, I would say that we were worried about security, so we funded 19 security tables. 7 are on the way right now. We were worried about education, and we spent 50,000 scholarships every year. Right now, we are impacting 2.5 million families in Mexico. Every family, 100% of those 2.5 million are under the poverty line. We are worried about integration, and we are, from the bank, motivating the integration of companies in value chains, in international value chains. We lend to almost 20,000 companies in Mexico, and we are motivating them to move into ESG and all that stuff. So what I would say is again, we can wait until the road is fixed for us, or we can move to action. I think this forum is exactly what we need, as to try to move to action. And there's a challenge for you, Enrique, for the next year to move to action and consolidate this. Because again, I think Mexico goes much beyond a context, I would say, context in a couple of years. No? If you say in 2000, BBVA in Spain bought Bancomer for 1.4 billion USDs at that time. This year, we are going to make 5 billion USDs of net result after taxes. And that gives you a sense on if you position yourself in 2000, at that moment Mexico was broken up, and I think it was the first in a row was a Canadian bank, and they saw a lot of problems in Mexico. They didn't do the investment, and then the Spanish bank did the investment, and now it pays out greatly, no? And this is happening in Mexico. CDPQ is doing great things. BlackRock is doing great things. General Motors are doing great things. So again, we can wait until the road is fixed and have the road exactly where we would like to have the road, or we can move to action. So we decided to move to action.
Thank you, Ricardo. One of the biggest trends in all the new industries, electromobility, semiconductors, electronics, is the automation, right? Eduardo Amaro from Rockwell Automation, you are in one of these companies that are pushing the automation and giving more productivity to the companies. Can you tell us the experience here in the region?
Absolutely, Enrique, and thank you again for being in this panel. Absolutely thrilled to be part of it. And yes, going back to the proximity and this evolution that we have experienced on this concept from nearshoring to AllyShoring, I completely agree. We really like this going beyond the proximity. Proximity is obviously very important because it goes back to making efficient supply chain and so on. But at the same time, it facilitates these new manufacturing schemes such as collaborative manufacturing, in which you can produce a good or a product truly coming from parts from all the parts of the region, right? Canada, the U.S. and Mexico. For example, cars or vehicles, right? You can manufacture a car in an assembler in Mexico, and at the same time, you can have this luxury of producing all these parts all across the different parts of the region. So that is a phenomenon, amazing agility on this process. Going back to the automation topic, Enrique, is also very good to see this evolution in terms of how we see these manufacturing capabilities in Mexico evolving from this perception of more manual low cost labor in Mexico, transitioning into really sophisticated automation manufacturers that are completely enabled around all these amazing technologies, you name it, digital twin, simulation, augmented reality, that are a reality in Mexico today. So we are really thrilled to see many customers, GM, for example, adopting all these amazing technologies, and is a reality today in Mexico, across, obviously, developing the talent. We will talk about that in a second, but talent, as we know, is key, and habilitating this talent in all these amazing technologies is key also to continue enabling and fueling all these investments that we see in different sectors, automotive, obviously, but electronics, food and bev, consumer goods, chemical, life sciences, you name it. It's booming, so we like it very much.
Thank you, Eduardo. Elaine, to forge an allies, you need to identify some needs from the parts, right? We need to become allies for this, this, and this. I need this, you need that. What are the main needs right now in this region? What are the needs for the U.S. on national security, for example?
Yeah, that's a great question. And by the way, Enrique, I need to give you a shout out for reading that article 3.5 years ago on AllyShoring and calling us and saying, let's talk more about this, because I don't think we would be here today.
So there was an article at The Hill in a newspaper in Washington, very relevant for the Congress, that Elaine and John Austin wrote about AllyShoring. And we saw that 3 years ago at the U.S. Mexico Foundation, and we decided to call them and say, well, let's create a program called AllyShoring in North America. The nearshoring factor became like two years after that. But
yeah.
Anyway.
So thank you for that. So I would start maybe one level higher, which is coming to a fundamental agreement across North America that we have a shared economic future. And I think that was touched on in an earlier panel, that we just have to embrace that, that we are linked to each other. And once we get to that frame and what that means, it becomes easier to identify what it is that we need from each other. So it's really moving from a more transactional state to something that's deeper around a set of values and that space of economic integration, where a job in the US is linked to a job in Mexico, is linked to a job in Canada, and all three have value within this system, and all all the boats need to rise with the tide. So that's kind of a fundamental framing. Within that, I think there are some core areas where there's opportunity. One is around skills development. I think this has been a theme that has come up over and over again. There's huge potential to drive skills development and mobility across industries, within sectors that would be beneficial in a number of areas. I think agriculture is one, advanced manufacturing of many different kinds. So getting to the core questions around skills and what that means from an economic resilience framework would be really interesting. I would also point out that there are emerging supply chains that are going to be absolutely critical. And this is something we've written about. And we go back to a reference, which is the Export-Import Bank of the United States put out in its China program response, which is kind of interesting, 11 or 12 different areas of emerging importance for U.S. manufacturing. And at the time that this happened, I was actually sitting on the council that was advising EXIM, and we decided to drop the US content requirements across these 12 transformational areas of technology and supply chain. So it included quantum, water and sanitation, pharma, lots of interesting areas, with the idea that we wouldn't be able to compete in these supply chains without bringing in content and co-collaborating around these supply chains with our allies and partners. So that opened up the opportunity to drive more investment in Mexico, more investment in Canada, but with US financing behind it. So I would go back to those areas of transformation. Some of those are already in process when we look at electric vehicles and batteries and critical minerals, but there are more. And we need to have a solid shared understanding of those areas that are going to drive the jobs of the future.
I'll go back to Jasper, because one of these concepts or words that we use now and on our daily basis is supply chain. And we talk about supply chains like, like suit or whatever, but supply chains probably are one of the most complex things right now in the world. And I think the automotive sector is one of the most complex industries with supply chains and industries. Can you illustrate a little bit the supply chain right now for a company like General Motors?
Yeah, so I will try to do our extensive supply chain strategy and resources justice here. But just to give you a sense, we spend $90 billion per year on parts, direct parts.
$90 billion.
$90 billion US per year, parts and goods. I mentioned before, 28 billion of that is spent in Mexico alone, and that's distributed across the world. It is a large, well-oiled machine at GM. We have 620 tier one suppliers here in Mexico, hundreds of those integrated in the US and Canada as well, which makes the importance of trade policy, cross-border trade flow, all that more important. I think when you look at our manufacturing footprint and our supplier footprint, the amount of times that the goods flow back and forth, parts, components, finished vehicles, back and forth across U.S. Mexico, U.S. Canada borders, it's hard to keep track just of how frequently that happens, even though there's finished goods on either side of any of these borders. But I think really the complexity is also, as Elaine had mentioned, it's not just about critical minerals or certain segments of it. It's all these components. It's like every part has X number of sub-tier suppliers, right, that we need to work with. The ripple effect, the multiplier effect of every dollar that we spend is huge when you think about it from a jobs and from an investment perspective. I think not just for GM, but for the entire automotive industry. I think just taking another look at Mexico alone, just in this year today, 2023, the automotive industry has announced $14.6 billion US in investment here in Mexico alone. And so the opportunity is huge. And I think with that level of investment comes complexities in terms of our existing footprint, but how do we continue to grow that? Not just for many of the parts that Elaine was talking about, many of the areas. There's a lot more to this: semiconductors, displays that go into the infotainment system in your car, tires, wheels, all kinds of stuff that you may not necessarily think about from a low tech or a high tech perspective. So there's a lot to do.
Ricardo, a country can develop strategies to develop new suppliers, national suppliers for an industry like the automotive industry or aerospace or semiconductors, and can have also a strategy to bring suppliers, to bring the knowledge from other regions, in this case, Michigan or Toronto or other regions like China. How can a bank coordinate efforts to develop national supplies or suppliers? I think that's one of the main challenges for Mexico, how to increase the number of national suppliers in different industries. And for many reasons, they need capital, right? They need knowledge, they need capital, they need good alliances with the OEMs, or with the tier one or other in other industries. But how can we coordinate that effort?
I think that's a really good question. And yesterday in the one-on-ones, we brought some ideas. I mean, at the final end, as the banks have a lot of information on the performance of the companies, I think one of the things that we should do, and we are going to do, and here we have Patricio, who is our responsible for the nearshoring team at BBVA. I think it's to do a simple marketplace. So first one would be communication. So there's a lot of companies in Mexico are performing very well. They're doing great jobs with corporate governance, really good fixed. And those companies don't have the contact to go to the US and tell them, okay, guys, I'm here, I'm doing a good job. So I would say the first one would be a simple marketplace trying to put in contact offer and demand. That would be the first one. And the second one is lending, of course, lending. In BBVA, we lend almost to different segments, I mean, to every segment in Mexico. And we are spending a lot of money developing through the credits, developing a lot of companies, long-term investments. We're doing equity with certain companies. So there's a lot of things that we as a bank are doing to develop different segments. But the first of all, I would say communication is the first one, because they don't have the contact to go and sell their products in the US.
Thank you, Ricardo. Michelle, I'll go back a little bit on China, because many suppliers of different industries are from China, right? That was the strategy for 2 decades or 3 decades, to produce effective goods at a very low price in some other regions, especially in Asia. How can the region leverage this moment to bring more suppliers here, to bring more capacity here, to produce in North America?
So China, as has been discussed on many of the panels, is such an incredibly important driver in this conversation. And I can speak from experience that a lot of what me and my colleagues do on a day-to-day basis is advising clients on de-risking their supply chains, remapping their supply chains, and in addition to that, bringing their integrated teams together. And the point made about the change in how teams operate within corporations is a really important shift in terms of understanding the complexities related to China and mapping out, where you should be looking to invest and build. But my overall view is that, and this is based on having served as the lead attorney during COVID for Operation Warp Speed, which was the operation undertaken by the United States government to ensure that we could develop the vaccines and then, of course, distribute them to turn the page on COVID, which was, of course, a global tragedy. So in terms of those teams working very closely together to map out those strategies, the number one issue that those teams need to be thinking about is, what are your opportunities today? What are your opportunities going to be 20 years from now? Reflecting back to the 2000s, I don't think people would have anticipated a global pandemic that, in my view, really pushed all of these supply chain issues to the forefront. And again, in terms of forecasting out where you should be operating, we're advising clients on conflict scenarios. And so identifying specifically where the conflicts are that are going to disrupt your supply chains, your manufacturing capabilities and capacities. But I think this is an incredible moment for North America. Look to the Inflation Reduction Act and just the provisions specifically tailored to bolster opportunities for North America. But I think that window, I don't know how long that window is going to be open, because any geopolitical shift from a national security perspective could disrupt what I see as a once in a lifetime opportunity to partner with U.S. companies. So if you're in Mexico, you should absolutely be mapping out potential partnerships in the sectors that you are doing business in, because there is opportunity and billions of dollars of U.S. funding to support those types of partnerships. And I'll close with this one last thought. Public-private partnerships are the future in terms of supply chain security and, of course, in terms of building out your friend-shoring, ally-shoring maps, because government cannot, again, confront another global-like pandemic or, think what might happen if, whether intentionally or unintentionally, a conflict arises in the South China Sea that involves Taiwan, where global supply chains would then be shut down. We in North America have to very deliberately have the conversations, business to business, government to government. You see a lot of activity in the United States right now where, for example, my firm, we are bringing together all of these stakeholders, and for the CHIPS Act in particular, we brought businesses to the table of discussions with Senator Schumer and his team, and that input from industry was so critically important to the final legislation that was passed. And I think it's a partnership. It's a partnership not just between our countries, it's also a partnership between business and government. And so that is the future. And to the extent that all of those various stakeholders are integrated and communicating and working together, that's the key to success, in my opinion.
Eduardo, I'm going to return with you about what changed on the automation from COVID, through COVID. But first, I want to ask you, all of you, and this is a single answer, okay? On China, decoupling or de-risking? Jasper, single answer.
De-risking.
De-risking. Ricardo?
I have to give it a thought. I have some time to answer that.
Michelle?
De-risking.
De-risking. Elaine?
Decoupling.
Decoupling, okay.
What?
Decoupling, okay.
Yeah,
And
I agree on that.
you agree,
Yeah.
okay. 2 and 2, Ricardo, you have the final vote here. Okay, let's go. I'm gonna ask you again at the end, Ricardo, but Eduardo, what on the automation, what changed through COVID?
Well, Enrique is very dynamic. Automation continues to be a key part on making the region more capable of adopting all these new technologies and enabling all these new factories to be state of the art and making the region more competitive, right? When we go back to analyzing or reviewing the numbers and we go to the amount of companies that have been moving out of China, we are just getting around 5% or so, as you know. So it's relevant, yes, it is. It represents around 2% of the GDP, which is a very important number. But at the same time, it let us think or do a deeper introspection into how can we raise or continue raising this competitiveness. And that goes back to two things. One of those is technology, as you are explaining, and the other one is talent. And those are very, very related between each other. So specifically talking about these two things, I would say that if we go to the layers of manufacturers in Mexico today, we have these state-of-the-art manufacturers with all these amazing technologies already in place. Electric vehicles is a reality today. We have very interesting facilities already in Mexico producing electric vehicles for many other regions in the world. But then we go to the next layer, talking about the suppliers, and there is a need to continue developing best practices around automation, around smart manufacturing, Industry 5.0, and so on. And if we go to the smaller layer, it's a huge amount of companies that are, willing to adopt all those new technologies, and it goes to the habilitation of the talent that we have. Specifically talking about the engineers, Mexico is one of the top 10 engineer producers in the world, right? It's between
120,000 per year?
yeah,
Something
more or
like
less.
that?
Yes, it could be. Now, what of this amount, or how much of this amount are prepared on all these new technologies? A few.
Yeah.
So it is a huge commitment that we are doing as enterprises, as technology producers and designers, to help all these companies to go to the next level. All these in the mid layer and in the top layer, in the bottom layer. Sorry, how do we help them to go upper through habilitation of this talent that is going to be capable of designing, maintaining, troubleshooting all these state-of-the-art operations?
Let's stay on talent. And Jasper, I think, again, a lot of new technologies on electromobility. How can a company like General Motors stay at the top of the knowledge on talent? It's the company role to reskilling, upskilling. It's the government participating there. It's the state, it's the municipality, the universities. Whose role is that?
No, it's a very good question. I think from our perspective, this goes back to a twist on Michelle's comments earlier about public-private partnerships. Collaboration is absolutely critical in this space. We can't do this on our own, no matter what investments we make. I mean, for General Motors, we've been investing in the electromobility, in the electric vehicle space now for several years, predating a lot of the recent policy actions in the U.S., just in terms of looking at our EV supply chains, looking at our manufacturing commitments, looking at the R&D there. But you're right, human capital, the talent, is important, and that takes a lot of public-private partnerships at various levels. We need to bring in the academic institutions, we need to bring in governments, we need to bring in various aspects of the industry, because one of the many things that we're learning in this space, it's not just mechanical engineers or automotive engineers that we need. It's geologists and metallurgical engineers for critical minerals to be able to extract and to process that into battery grade material. It's, like I said there, and then software developers that are going to develop the next generation of artificial intelligence and a lot of the inputs into some of the data services that we need that we can monetize in vehicles. I think there's a lot there in terms of the talent that we would typically look for, and also where we would look for it is all becoming more diverse. And it's not just these advanced degrees, right? Vocational training programs, all kinds of different curriculum, whether it's STEM, outside of STEM programs, things like that. And these are things that we're looking at and that we continue to work on, but more is necessary, not just for the automotive industry, but for many of the industries that we're now touching on if we're going to build these supply chains at scale.
Ricardo, can you talk a little bit about access of capital for this talent? At least in Mexico, the huge difference, or total difference, is if a young or the next generation will have the access of capital to study something, to go to the university, to be prepared internationally. How can we move forward in Mexico on financial inclusion for this new generation that really, really needs this type of education to be part of the productivity of the country?
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, in general terms, banks are ready to finance everything that is a good project, in general terms. So I would say education, of course, is something that we are going to bet, or we need to bet even more. I would say first one would be, we have an issue in Mexico on the poverty line, and a lot of people who is under the poverty. So scholarships would be the first one for those to grow up. Second one, we are financing a lot of universities in Mexico. We are financing and motivating the investment in a lot of different universities and new scholarships. So I think that's the way to motivate those educations to go ahead. When we talk about how a bank could develop all this, I would say, in general terms, BBVA and the rest of the banks are expanding a lot, all the system in mortgages, in commercial banking and all that stuff. I mean, we are growing almost 20% in commercial banking. In SMEs, we are growing 30%. The greatest expansion that we are going to do in the bank ever is going to be next year in mortgages. So I think that's the way we can integrate in the system all these people.
Yeah. Let me go with you, Eduardo. Talent sometimes is expressed against automation. So if we have more automation, we're gonna have more unemployment rate, right? It's like this versus that, and I don't see it that way. I think automation also brings you new skills, new technologies, and new jobs. How do you see that?
And that is a great question, Enrique, because it's number one myth around automation, right? It reduces jobs. Actually, what we're seeing specifically in Mexico happening since 2020 is a steady income of manufacturing jobs that are in demand and all across the different industries that we serve. So that is amazing because it points us to a different kind of talent, right? As we were explaining, Mexico was or has been in this transition from a more manual labor to more sophisticated products and goods that are produced in the country. So that is, again, tied to the engineers or all these skills that are required against enabling all these amazing technologies in manufacturing. And what I see, or what we see, is that it has been transitioned into a more specific skill set that we need to develop on those engineers so they can work in these companies. And the demand is there. So the challenge is already there. I was talking to Michelle yesterday. How can we continue partnering so we can continue developing all this talent that is going to be in demand in the next year? But again, it's going to be more specialized in all these amazing technologies, but we need to be there before they are required. So I was remembering, for example, in a couple of meetings that I've been around the transshipment corridor that Ambassador Salazar was talking this morning, and we were talking to the governors of the states of the Southeast around the transshipment corridor between the two important ports in the transshipment corridor, and it's going to be accompanied by these industrial parks that are going to be positioned there, and the whole idea is to develop the ecosystem around those communities. And the main challenge is we need to be working with those universities right now and institutions so they can be ready to work in those industrial parks, right? So the challenge is there, and the demand is there. So we don't see diminishing. On the contrary, but we need to be on top of these partnerships with universities and other institutions so we can develop that talent ahead.
Thank you. Last question for Michelle and Elaine, and then a last round of interventions from the speakers. Yesterday, I asked Peter Sahan, who are the main allies right now for the U.S., right? In the traditional term of ally, right? Or in the U.S. term of ally, national security, military, defense. And he said Australia, New Zealand, Japan, UK, right? Those are the top. Are you seeing other countries moving or creating strategies to become an ally of the US, to take advantage? Canada also, he mentioned Canada. Do you see other countries? Let's start with Michelle, then Alain.
So I agree with that list. India comes immediately to mind. Okay. The desire...
It's not yet an ally, but
not yet, but we're moving in that direction. And, when you look across, sectors in terms of who you need to partner with to ensure that you can, not just, acquire the materials and supplies you need, not just from the government's perspective, but from a business perspective, India is a major player, and we are going to have to find ways to build relationships beyond China. And it's forcing us to really reevaluate who our friends and allies are. And we've got to work on it, but I think the momentum is there. But India is going to be a major, major player in terms of friendshoring and ally shoring, I think, moving forward.
Elaine?
Yeah, I would generally agree. I think India is probably would be next on my list as well. Beyond that, I would look towards what's happening in Europe right now with accession to NATO. Sweden, Finland, and then some of the Baltic states who have a very clear response to Russia's aggression and see the value of NATO. So in some ways, even stronger interest and alignment than existing partners within NATO. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic. But I think there will be more of that alignment coming out of the situation in Ukraine. And of course, Ukraine is very interested in becoming part of NATO. So this is a reflection on U.S. leadership and alignment around U.S. values.
And maybe we're forgetting about Israel. Israel for sure is a tremendous ally of the U.S. Jasper, last comment?
No, I think this discussion has been great, and all the discussions here really kind of focus around a lot of the themes, right, in terms of how do we build this ally shoring concept. But I mean, for GM, it's really, we are building this North American value chain, and it makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. I said de-risking earlier, but I would leave you with this thought just in terms of it's not just about resilience and security, and but it's also about, and not just cost competitiveness as well, it's about sustainability and it's about scalability. I would say, remembering all four of those aspects, if we can't do this for the long term in a sustainable and responsible way, and we can't scale it, then what's the point, right, in terms of these investments? So I think keeping all those factors there as we kind of go forward, addressing issues like energy, human capital, security, things like that. This will all be important. And then I just reiterate that comment from before that Michelle made. Collaboration is absolutely critical. We cannot do this on our own. We cannot do this overnight, and we cannot do this on our own. But it's a good problem to have in order to think about all the investments that we've done to date. It's just a matter of how much more can we do.
Thank you, Jasper. Ricardo?
I think we have to move forward. I think when we talk about ally shoring, fentanyl, insecurity, education, I think it makes a lot of noise in the system. I think it doesn't reflect the reality of Mexico. Again, collaboration, companies are performing very, very well in Mexico. Mexico has a lot of things to say beside all this noise. So what I would say is BBVA is here to articulate all this. And bet in Mexico is one of the best things that you should do if you want to get scale economies, profits, and so on. No? So try to avoid the noise and do your job.
We need more success stories out there and a better narrative. Michelle?
My thought after listening to the many panels and discussing not just the need for greater integration and collaboration is businesses cannot sit on the sidelines and just watch policy shifts and policy trends and geopolitical trends. Companies have to be at the table informing from their own perspectives the policymakers who are ultimately crafting policies that are going to affect your business. So I would encourage, every business to look at your integrated teams, figure out how you can get involved in this conversation, because governments are ill-equipped to adjust very quickly to all of these various trends. When they do so, and they do so well, it's because their policies are informed by the people who are observing very directly and on a first-hand basis all of the effects of the policies that are going to be enacted. So don't stand on the sidelines, get involved and become, an integral partner with both your government leadership and your government stakeholders, but also, one another.
Thank you, Michelle. Elaine?
Three points. The first is going back to this question about what's the next global shock. I think we can pretty much be certain that there is another global shock coming. What the form is, we don't know. Whether that's a financial shock, a climate shock, a geopolitical shock. 20 years ago, it was 9/11. Then it was COVID. What's next? Is it in 20 years? Is it in 10 years? We don't know, but we need to figure out what we've learned from COVID in particular, and how we apply the lessons. Because no matter what the shock is, there will be implications for supply chains. There will be implications for economic resilience. So we need to get our heads around that. Second point is on, because you brought it up, Enrique, de-risking versus decoupling. I don't think anybody would suggest that a full decoupling from China is in any way a good idea. But the reason I tend towards decoupling, it's a stronger word, but I think that's what's happening. We can call it de-risking because it seems like it's maybe a nicer way to describe it, but there is decoupling going on, and I think it's going to continue. And it got me thinking about other terms. For example, I used to do a lot of work in the anti-corruption space, and we always got a lot of pushback about talking about the term corruption. You know, maybe we should call it business facilitation payments. You know, sometimes you just need to call a spade. And that brings me to the AllyShoring question versus something like friendshoring or another term. I mean, you can use them somewhat interchangeably, but the idea that we can use the term ally in an economic context is really important. There's a national security context and a military context, but there's an economic context, and I don't think we should shy away from talking about that. I think that's that's what I would offer.
Thank you, Lane. Eduardo?
Yeah, well, today, North America is the biggest manufacturing region in the world, and it comes, as we have spoken today, beyond just the proximity. It goes back to many other unique advantages that we have and that we should continue leveraging to gain more competitiveness. I think that is kind of the key factor, so we can continue getting all these investment that is being done outside of the traditional places. And we talk about very specific capabilities that we have in the region today around innovation, creativity, speed, right? We have many success cases around very successful manufacturers already placed in Mexico, and again, adopting all these technologies around making them more efficient, more sustainable, more profitable. And we should continue partnering on identifying the ways to continue moving the needle and removing all these specific obstacles that we continue to see around talent development, around infrastructure, around safety, security, cybersecurity, and so on. So I think this is another unique moment. I truly believe that it's already been, you know, a very interesting acceleration of this phenomenon in manufacturing growth in Mexico. But the best is yet to come, and we need to continue partnering together and identifying the ways to eliminate all these specific obstacles and solve the problems associated to competitiveness.
Thank you, Eduardo. So with that, thank you all the speakers for this conversation. Thank you for the audience. Thank you so much.